many HR practitioners have seen cases where some of the best talents were affected, right? Some of the top performers were affected because there was certain decision make in their operating model where they had to shut down some businesses. There were cases where sometimes the company decide to relocate their business outside Malaysia, and they shut down the whole factory as an example, and great talented people were affected, right? So it's perfectly all right to mention that, right? And also to take note is some companies actually do background check, and part of background check, one of the questions they may ask is, how did you leave the organization? And it's only appropriate that the person gives the correct information and the accurate information because they check.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Workaround Podcast. Today, I am going to do something different. I am going to have my guest to introduce herself and also to share with us what kind of topic that we are going to talk about. So I have Sugunah in the studio with me today. Welcome, Sugunah.
Thank you, Mei Fong, for having me in this podcast today.
Yep. So why not you take over this opening a podcast by introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mei Fong. So my name is Sugunah Verumandy, and I help organization in training, partnering, and transformation, particularly in the space of human resources and leadership. And today I'm here to share a little bit about some of the insights in terms of restructuring and why this topic is because there's been a lot of news in the media recently in terms of restructuring. I thought it is an appropriate time to come and share some insights on this matter.
Restructuring sounds very serious and professional. When it comes to layman terms, or maybe from employee perspective, it's called layoff. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But what do you think if I have this statement called everyone may lose a job one day? What do you think?
I may have slightly a different view, Mei Fong. I think, yes, there are changes that happens to job from time to time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they lose the jobs. There could be different impact. Some may be losing job. Some may be actually upskilling themselves to take on new jobs as well. And these are all opportunities for people at workplace. Yes.
Yeah, spot on. That's a purpose, and also that's the reason. And the title of the topic today is about silver lining of layoff. Now, Sugunah, let's go into the topic itself. I would like to talk about companies. Of course, company makes such decisions they can come with 1,001 reasons, right? It could be M&A, surplus of talent, economic factors, etc. But perhaps go through with us different types of layoff, and actually what led to company to choose one over another.
That's definitely a great question, Mei Fong. Generally, there are two types of layoff. One is what's called as voluntary, and the other one is involuntary. And voluntary is where individuals, they put up their hands to say that, look, I would like to separate from the organization with some package. And typically that's through either a voluntary separation scheme or a mutual separation scheme. Involuntary, on the other hand, is where the organization makes a decision on who to let go, right, with some form of compensation. Now, to the question, which decision, whether voluntary or involuntary, that all depends on various factors that organization needs to take into consideration. In particular, decisions are based on which are the one that helps the organization to achieve its objective, particularly taking into consideration risk factors such as people risk. It must have minimal impact to this. So people risk, financial risk, customer risk, legal, reputation, and particularly regulation as well. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that when they're looking at restructuring, there are some key insight that matters, whether from an organizational or individual perspective. And if I may, Mei Fong, share a little bit on that.
Definitely.
Thank you. So we all acknowledge that organizations have a right to reorganize their business. We all acknowledge that the law in the country acknowledges that as well. That's point number one. Point number 2 is whenever there's a reorganization or restructuring take place, sometimes certain roles can diminish to an extent where it's no longer viable for the organization to keep that role. And as such, that's when redundancy happens that leads to sometime layoff. Yeah. However, the key point here is that not every restructuring or reorganization leads to redundancy and excess of headcount that leads to layoff.
Yep.
Not
Precisely.
every.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And why I say that is because actually organizations have responsibility, they have accountability to exhaust all options in trying to retain its workforce before it even start thinking about laying off. They do have obligations and responsibility. So if I can give some example, actually there's many ways to prevent layoffs from an organizational perspective. Among others, if I may just share a couple of examples here very briefly, is that number 1, proactive and strategic manpower planning, right? So organizations must know how to plan their workforce effectively so there's no excess of headcount at any given
talent.
point. That's right.
That's also always a key reasons, right?
Exactly, right? So where, the attention to such processes is very, very important. The other examples could be around upskilling and redeploying the workforce, right? So you do see that whenever there's changes in operations or changes in operating models, right, organizations need to think in advance, how do we upskill and redeploy people into these growth areas? That's another example. Maybe I can share 2 more examples very quickly. Is that the third one is whenever there's attrition that's happening in the organization. Actually, organizations, what the managers could do is that then look at the internal capabilities first, right? And see who we can redeploy rather than trying to hire from externally. So that's another example. And last but not least, often forgotten are hotspot areas. Simple example. In some organizations, you can see some departments, they may have excessive overtime, right? So, and then it's good for managers go and study there and see, okay, maybe it's about time we redeploy more headcount there. Perhaps that department needs more support. So these are some of the ways you can prevent layoff, right? And Malaysia Code of Conduct says very clearly that all this need to be taken into consideration before even getting into layoff.
Yes, right.
And one last factor, these days, Meifong, everyone is talking about ESG, right? And the S, the social in the ESG. So organizations are being asked to reflect what is their obligation in S, that is making sure no one is left behind, that they are constantly upskill and reskill and ensuring that they do their best to try to retain the workforce.
Oh, interesting.
So those are some of the examples.
I like that the element of ESG as part of the key consideration, because we, from a company's perspective, we keep talking about the cost, the business risk, the business impact, but how about ESG, the social part?
Exactly.
And of course, we have the governance,
And
like you mentioned, right? The social part, right? And also the manpower optimizations that HR been working on to ensure that at the end of the day, okay, it's just nice, not the surplus of the talent or shortage of the talent, right? Good. Then now, thanks for this. But I just would like also hear from you from your experience, right? What are some of the best practices that the company can follow to ensure that these sensitive issues is managed more effectively?
Oh, that's a great question, Meifong. Thank you for asking that. I think that's a very important one to be considered, right? Whenever such exercises take place. So there are many, actually, best practices. And if I could share a few, of course, firstly, the principle is always do everything you can to avoid. That's always principle number 1, and I gave some examples earlier. But having said that, if organization had no choice but to resort to some form of layoff, then a couple of the best practices are, number 1 is, of course, clear communication to the individuals to say why such exercise is happening. I think that's an obligation of an organization to do that. And then on top of it is, of course, providing sufficient notice to the employee so that they are prepared to move forward in their lives.
It's not like 24 hours kind of.
Oh yes, that's absolutely not acceptable. You're right.
It happened in one organization that we read, I think, recently in Singapore.
I don't know
so
how,
I think
I wonder how that happened, right?
Yeah,
I mean, organizations are always willing to wait for people when they want to hire. They wait 2-3 months, but it just, when such decisions happen, they are willing to let go to enforce.
No, I want to correct you when it comes to hiring. It's always yesterday in the expectations.
Exactly. It was yesterday. You are spot on there. You're right. So going back to the serious matter, right? In terms of the best practices, so the other thing is going back to giving them sufficient notice so they can be prepared. And not only that, it's giving them sufficient time so they can start looking for a job within the organization itself, right? Other thing involves that, when the communication is being made, be very empathetic, be genuine, really take care of the individual during that communication time as well. And some companies, they have this employee assistance program. They have counseling support, because the impact is not just for the individual, it actually impacts the family members as well. Exactly. So companies do that. And on top of it, they give support, like, how do you prepare your resumes? How can I help you to look for another job? They do all that, right? And some good examples that we have seen is that, especially factories, it's quite interesting. What they do is they actually speak to the neighboring factories.
Oh, yes.
To see whether, some of their workforce can be, hired by these factories as well.
That's where I see the element of empathy. You are doing this because you have no options. I think I've seen a lot during COVID time where, unfortunately, they have to let go some employees. They do that. They reach out to HR friends, HR committee, say, hey, I do have a surplus of talent in my organizations. We're trying to equip with this kind of skill set. Yeah, I think I like that element of empathy. In this exercise.
That's right. And one observation that we are seeing recently is that not everyone wants to go back to employment. So we do see cases where sometimes when, layoffs happen, actually employees say, look, I take the package, I want to move on, and I want to be an entrepreneur. So we see actually some organization, what they do training around entrepreneurship and teach them how to set up their businesses and whatever not. So those are some of the best practices that we have seen before.
That good to know. So again, I also see that kind of inclusivity in that process itself, because to cater the needs of everyone.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. Now, when it comes to this kind of exercise, the element of unfair biases somehow is in between the line. But then, is there any a certain group of employers will be protected or exempted from this exercise, or how the company can ensure that this kind of element of unfairness and biases put into very, very minimum?
I mean, definitely it's a great question, Mei Fong, and every organization has this accountability to ensure that whenever layoff happens, unfortunately layoff happens, that the exercise is bona fide, it's done in good faith. And typically there are a set of criteria that they look at. The common ones in Malaysia and many countries is typically last in first out, right? But of course they can look at other criteria as well. But that is a very important exercise in making decision who's the individual. And that needs to be signed off by the CEO, by HR, by legal, to ensure that the process has been fair and equitable. That's number one. The second thing, I mean, you had a question on exemption. Typically, we see in many countries, pregnant employees are exempted from such exercise as well.
Yep, the pregnancy and perhaps medical illness is another, questionable one, right? Okay, thanks for this. It's more on the company side, right? Come to very important role in this exercise, is something that we can't run away, is a HR, right? So now, how can HR help the employees and the company to manage this again, right, more seamlessly? What is our role in the entire process?
Yeah, that's definitely a very great question. I mean, definitely HR plays a very crucial role in this exercise, along with the business leaders. And HR does put on multiple hats, right, Mi Fong? They put on the head of a trusted business advisor, and they put on the head of a employee advocate as well. And let me explain that a little bit. From a trusted business advisor perspective, HR needs to have the knowledge of business. They must have the knowledge of business so that they can give the relevant advice to the managers in how to minimize disruption to business during this very difficult moment that organizations and individuals go through. That's one. Secondly, they need to definitely have knowledge of regulations and law, right? So that's important, so that you do protect the interests of both the organization and the individual. And thirdly, of course, you appropriately keep emphasizing that the feelings of the employee, right? So HR is also the employee advocate. Employees must definitely feel they've been seen, heard, and understood throughout the process as well. So as employee advocates, they must really know what's the impact to each and every individual, so that they are able to provide the support throughout the process, right? So really listening out to them and spending time really trying to understand what is the impact, and not just carrying out the exercise because they've been mandated to do it.
Otherwise, we've seen an executor. Okay, this is a go. This is where the communications are packed. Here you go.
Yeah,
That's
exactly,
it,
right? And HR needs to go deeper than that to really understand the nuance. Spending time, offering help, offering support. So all that is required. And if the HR is able to do that, then definitely, there's employee feel that, hey, there's fair, it's being fair. I've been treated fairly in this process, and as a matter of fact, when we speak to a lot of labor officers in the country, what they say is most of the cases that goes to the labor department, it's not because the employees do not accept that such exercise has happened, but it's because they felt they were not treated fairly throughout the process.
Yeah, it's about communications, right?
Absolutely.
So when talking about communication itself, right, how can HR professional balance between communicating these transparently, honestly, at the same time maintaining the confidentiality and privacy of the employee?
Oh, that's really, really a great question, Mi Fong. So how they can do that is like a couple of insights I could share. Number one is from a communication perspective, they definitely need to be very clear, concise, consistent, and accurate with the information, right? And they need to be able to articulate clearly why the restructuring is happening and why the individual is affected. So that has to be very, very clear. The other thing for consideration is number two is preparing the managers, training the managers. I see you nodding.
Agree.
Yeah, exactly. Because not many managers are aware, right? They care for the people, but they don't know how to do it.
Yep.
And this is how the role of HR comes in, right? Preparing the managers to be able to have that conversation with a lot of great care and understanding, and helping employee go through the process and come out of it stronger, right? So that's the role of HR in terms of communication. Maybe one or two other examples I could give is in terms of communication is, when do you do it in a broader communication and when do you do it more in a private conversation, right? So the broader conversation is, the reason why the organization is going through the changes. That's something they can do as a broader conversation. But anything that's very impact to the individual, like why that decision on the individual, or what's the compensation package for the individual, that's very private, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's very private. And of course, the legal and ethical consideration comes in as well, right? There are certain information that's very sensitive and very private. Then HR must know how to maintain such data as well, right? So those are some of the nuances from a communication perspective.
Yeah, talking about, is there any taboo or any behavior that HR should avoid in managing the communications and the process itself?
Oh, yes.
Any example, any experience to share?
So many taboos, Mei Fong, so many taboos, so many consideration. It's a very sensitive exercise. It's a very it can be very stressful for many people, right?
Even stressful for the HR. We
Absolutely.
understand HR can be very stressful when come to
Yes.
this, but definitely we need to take note of the certain taboo.
Yes, exactly. So among the taboos, very straightforward ones that I can share is number one, do not generalize or have a cookie cutter approach. Every single individual is very different and very unique, and the impact that it has on them and the family can be absolutely different from one another. So there's really no cookie cutter approach. Really try to understand the impact on each and every one and offer help to get them through that process and come out stronger. The second taboo I can share is no communications during festives or when anybody is going through some personal challenges in life. Then you definitely have to defer the decision, right? So that's the second taboo. The third taboo is always a very simple one, but it has major impact. When communication is being made, never start with good morning, good afternoon. Because employees see that it's not a good morning, what's good about the morning and what's good about the afternoon, because you are delivering the message to me. So that's always like, don't start it that way. So those are some of
Interesting. Tell us more. So say in this situation, but of course later we're going to have are we going to have a role play? No, maybe there. But let's talk about, let's say, you have a one scenario comes in and you are not going to wish the person good morning to greet them either.
Every HR person,
Okay.
we are
There you go.
absolutely clear that we don't say that.
We don't even need to ask, hey, how are you doing?
We start straight away by thanking them and being grateful that they have come to see us.
Okay.
That's what we start with, because when you're being called into a HR room, there's always a fear and what did I do? So we always thank them, whether it's a great news or it's a very challenging news. We always thank the employee by saying thank you for coming and seeing me today. So in the case of this, unfortunately, if there's layoff, always thank them, even if it's case where individual has put up their hand, in terms of
VSS.
voluntary VSS. Sometimes they put up their hand, they look eager, they say, look, I just want to move on.
Yes.
Give me the package. I've already planned my future. I want to be an entrepreneur. Even cases like that, right? When the actual communication is taking place, emotions can be very different because they've tied the emotion to the organization. So we are always very mindful of that, and we start by, even such cases of voluntary, we say thank you for coming and seeing me today. That's some of the practices.
Something new, because we always greet people with good morning, or at least how are you doing today. So that's I didn't notice there's always a taboo, something that I need to learn too. Picture now, so much when it comes to this kind of process, right? It involves, of course, the technical side of it, communication. I want to talk about EQ. Right? It's emotional. It can be emotional, conversation, right? Let's, maybe share a bit of the EQ that need to have among our HR professionals in handling this by taking care of the feeling of the employees.
Thank you for raising it up, Mei Fong, because often, HR is forgotten in this process, right?
We are not robot, right?
Yeah.
I always
we are human too.
Yeah.
We are human too. So, yes, EQ is absolutely a crucial perspective in the whole exercise. So emotional quotient or emotional intelligence, particularly for HR folks, right? For HR professionals, because they are the one who's fronting this together with the leaders. And typically they need to be one or two steps ahead in guiding the leaders as well. So it does affect them. Actually, it's not. So the HR professionals will definitely need to firstly acknowledge and understand the impact on themselves and also the people around them. So it's absolutely very important. And it's okay for the HR professionals to be vulnerable. You see, many times we'll say, okay, we need to be strong, we need to be composed. Yes, you need to be strong, you need to be composed, because you're going to be the source of inspiration for others. But at the same time, like you mentioned, we are human too, right? HR people are human too. And therefore, it's okay to be vulnerable, because when you're vulnerable, people see your authenticity, and then they trust you more. They open up more to you as well. So that's one side of it, right? And in terms of helping the individuals, making them seen, heard and understood, spending time to really understand what are the emotions they're going through, helping them and all that, right? This really creates a lot of respect. People feel like, oh, there's dignity in the process. As a matter of fact, the demonstration of EQ actually helps the employee to a large extent that, like I said, they feel fair and all that. Actually creates a more positive environment for the organization.
And also the experience. We're talking about it's also part of the employee experience as well.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Because I really like it when you say employee experience, because at the end of the day, sometimes, many times, right, layoff happen not because, to the individuals because they're not performing or whatever. It's because the situation that has taken place in the organization, and people may want to come back one day to the company, right? They want to come back. So, this will be the first batch of people you want to hire because they know the culture of the organization as well, right? So make sure that like you mentioned, right, that they are taken care, the experience is great, because they will then think that if I have an opportunity,
I will come back.
Yeah, we call that the boomerang effect, right? You come back. Right. So that's how, so yes, very important EQ in creating that experience, and somewhat a positive culture is maintained even during these difficult moments.
Yeah. Why I asked this is, Sugunah, is because I've been mentoring a lot of employees affected by layoff. So I think most of the common feedback is actually it's very robotic conversations. Of course, there's no very minimum Q&A because let's say okay, I book my time from 1 to 5, and I have a few employees are queuing up, so everyone is given like 30 minutes, so next, that's so you don't the employees was telling me that they didn't even have time to ask and to express their emotion. So it's fast, it's quick one. Then of course we'll come back to you with next process. That's it, right? So I thought, when come to having that kind of conversations, let's be human a bit, even from a HR or even a manager. When you communicate these to your employees, let's have the element of empathy a bit in the conversation, right?
Absolutely. And to your point, that should always be follow up after the conversation.
Oh, definitely, we need to, right? Because I say, what's next? So we'll come back to you with a list of action plans, right? Now, I know that this exercise it can be unavoidable because of business decisions, but maybe let's share what are some of the signs that employees should look out for before the big wave coming.
That's another good question, Mi Fong. And to be frank, sometimes there are signs and sometimes there aren't signs, right? So the situation where there are signs is some, especially like some global MNCs, they would typically say, look, we are going to trim down X percentage of headcount, that's cost saving exercise. And they would typically say these are the markets or regions that such exercise is going to take place. And therefore employees in other markets start thinking about, oh my God, is this a trigger for us, right? Well, however, there are some organizations they don't see the sign. And if I could give an example, it could be because the organization is having a new total operating model. They want to change the operating model, and they decide to close down some business operations. They can be doing well, but because of change of business direction, they are shutting down some operations. So that you don't see the signs as well, right? So typically, what we encourage employees to do is stay focused in your role, stay focused in your job, make an impact, make a contribution, because then you're always adding value to organization, number one. Number two is continuously upskill and reskill yourselves so that you stay relevant regardless whatever changes that happens in the organization, because you will always have opportunity to move to different roles, whether within the organization or outside the organization. And if I can share some data here, Mi Fong, if I may, if you look at the World Economic Forum report, right, it clearly says that by 2025, which is next year, 85 million jobs would have been displaced due to automation and job-changing markets, right? And this report also says that 97 million new jobs will be created due to,
innovation.
Exactly, right? And this is due to the division in labor, augmenting human, machine, and algorithm. So there's new jobs coming as well. This is the great time for employees really upskilling and reskilling themselves. And the fact is, in Malaysia, many companies contribute to HRD fund. So the funds are available in the organization, and actually employees should put up their hands and say, look, I want to be reskilled. Data literacy is big game, right? In industrial revolution these days. What else, right? Being flexible and adaptable to situation is very important these days. Now we call it a brittle, anxious, non-linear, incomprehensible world these days, right? It has moved from VUCA, right? So this is great opportunity for employee. And what else they can prepare themselves is in terms of being curious, having a continuous learning mindset will actually help them to stay relevant.
That's why, there's a term called learning agility. So it's a lifelong learning. It's a way to go. So I think this is a very powerful message and very positive one. There's a really aligned with what we are going to talk about today, aligned with the topics as well. It's a silver lining. There's always a positive side of anything, right? So now we talk about the sign, and also we want to talk about what to expect. Just now you talk about let's say no good morning, no greetings, right? But let's say an employee, I got let's say I got an email early morning, 7 o'clock. Sometimes it happens at 5 a.m. in the morning. When you come to office, you open an email, ta-da, I got it, right? So what to expect when you are being called to the HR room or meeting room for this? Is there any questions that I can ask?
Yeah.
Besides listening to what is going to be delivered.
Yeah. First of all, sending an email to invite for a meeting is fine. But sending an email to inform that the person's job has been affected is absolutely...
Yeah. No, what I mean is actually the invitations for the meeting with HR and your managers, at a very odd hours. You sometimes it happen, especially in the MNC. Why there's a whole group of regional HR and business leaders in town out of nowhere, out of the moon, without prior notification, something wrong, and I'll be, I'm selected for that meeting.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, what to expect in that meeting?
What to expect in the meeting? Yeah, what to expect is, number one, actually, every organization has an accountability to inform why the person is impacted. So the employee should expect that, and if they are not getting the response, then they have every right to ask that, right? So one. Number two is, of course, given the opportunity to be considered for roles within the organization, that is one of the expectation. Providing sufficient notice so people can prepare themselves. That's the other. And of course, explanation on their entitlements as a result of the impact, right? So there's severance payment and whatever not, so that information need to be given to the employee.
Besides the compensation, the support systems that will be given throughout this
Absolutely. Journey. The support system and how to prepare them to transition to the next role is also a very, very important information, and it just doesn't stop there. They can actually throughout the time that they're still in the organization, that support needs to be given to the individual.
Sure. So these are the few key things that we need to take note of, now.
And employee have a right to actually file in the labor department,
Within 60 days.
in the IR department, if they feel that there's bad faith or mala fide in the exercise, that's employees' right.
So, there's always a no surprise when there's some HR that involved in this, always being asked and invited to IR office for Q&A sessions, right? So, yes, that's our employee right. Now, the other thing is I want to talk about the impact itself, right, Sugunah? So, especially Malaysians, let's put aside that, the Western culture, especially Malaysian or maybe Asian thingy, that we feel we have doubt. Why me? We have somehow we feel very malu that I don't want to tell my family. How am I going to break the news to my family, my friends, that I'm being laid off and I'm affected by this exercise. So, they are really worried about their reputation, maybe ties with their work performance, which is completely not true, because there are many reasons why, company decided to make such decisions. What is your advice to this group of employees that still have concern?
Yeah. And it's a very it is a natural feeling for employee to go through that, right? And so two things I can share here. Number one is the counseling processes typically help prepare the employee in how to have that conversation, whether with the family and friends. Typically, they do that. Now, I really think it's perfectly all right to inform, particularly if they are looking for other job, to inform the employer that yes, they were impacted by separation exercise. It's perfectly all right, because in a separation exercise, it doesn't mean that the person is non-performing. I mean, and many HR practitioners have seen cases where some of the best talents were affected, right? Some of the top performers were affected because there was certain decision made in their operating model where they had to shut down some businesses. There were cases where sometimes the company decide to relocate their business outside Malaysia, and they shut down the whole factory, as an example, and great talented people were affected, right? So it's perfectly all right to mention that, right? And also to take note is some companies actually do background check, and part of background check, one of the questions they may ask is, how did you leave the organization? And it's only appropriate that the person gives the correct information and the accurate information, because they check on that.
Precisely,
right?
because they have doubt, right? So I think I agree with you. It's completely all right to mention that, I work from this company from this period to that period due to layoff, due to, realignment exercise, etc. Now, I would like to, and ask you, Sugunah, in terms of your personal experience, I'd like to share, maybe some interesting or maybe toughest challenges, experience that you have gone through in managing that, and what have you learned from that moment, the experience?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's a great question, making me feel that I'm being cared. Thank you. I mean, obviously, a lot of HR practitioners, we go through a lot of challenges. And for me, one of the toughest one had always been that, what can we coach and guide our managers to do so that we don't even have to resort to layoff. To me, always that's the number one challenge, right? Like we spoke about the proactive and strategic manpower planning, 2-3 years in advance, so that where we know there are certain growth areas, then where do we upskill and reskill and move our people there, So all that, to me, is the most challenging one. To me, that's the number one. To avoid or minimize such an exercise. And typically, how I overcome that is, whether it's me or many HR practitioners, we go back to the management again and again and again to try to educate on this, right? What else have we done? What else have we done to take care? How can we minimize? How can we mitigate and all that? Failing which, then sometime what we do, we actually go to the CEO and ask for help. We say, look, CEO, we really need you to come in now and, help us advocate what we need to do. So, and typically CEOs, they are very helpful.
is involved business as well, right?
Yes.
So it's also their responsibility.
Yes.
Now, why I'm asking this is because, when it comes to this kind of sensitive exercise, right, HR always been blamed, but people do not know that how much HR been doing, to safeguard and to ensure that minimum amount of employees will be affected. What is your thought if, when it comes to cases like this, HR always to be blamed? Oh, my HR don't do this, don't protect me. What's your thoughts?
It's when changes happen, it's pretty natural for individuals to go through different emotions, right? Can be blame, denial, anger, shock. And of course, for some, they are happy because they just want to take the package and move on, right? So you will see different emotions within the organization. Blame is a common one, and it's understandable. And the blame is, yes, to HR, sometimes to the managers, and sometimes the individuals blame themselves as well.
Oh, this is something that I really, we really want to try to avoid because, going through a few mentoring sessions with those impacted one, there's always the common feedback. Why me?
Why me? Exactly. Right. So that's why when if the HR person sees there's some degree of blame taking place and all that, it's to accept, not to be defensive, but to accept that it's a natural process in any change management, right? Particularly when shocking news is being delivered, and then what HR can do then is focus on the individual and trying to help them transition from that phase to what's next. That's the best thing they can do, because the faster they help them to accept the news and to move on, the better it is for the individual. And that's where the counseling support and all that comes in.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah, but some company I noticed that they also outsource to the consulting firm to do it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so now just now I want to bring you back to talking about what can we do differently, what the employees can do differently. I want to talk about silver lining a lot when it comes to this, because I believe that we can always find opportunities out of the challenges. Perhaps maybe let's list down together what are the positive outcome that we have seen so far that we've it is going to happen to some impacted employees, and also for the company as well.
Yeah. I mean, if I could take one example, particularly from an employee perspective, is that I mean, we definitely, Mei Fong, I'm sure you too, right? We have seen a lot of friends around us that were affected or impacted by the layoff exercises, and many of them have come out very, very strong, much stronger.
Yes,
right?
I have witnessed that and managed cases like that as well.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, and some actually have taken on the package and move on to bigger roles, amazing organizations, better work-life balance, job that gives them better life balance. That's one we are seeing a lot these days. We have seen friends that, took on the package and move on to become entrepreneurs and very successful, whether it's running a small nasi lemak stall or big consulting firm, whatever it is, they have been very, very successful. That's close to home. And if I take one example, it's a very popular example in the international spaces, Jan Koum, who was laid off from Yahoo, co-founded WhatsApp, which was acquired by Facebook for $19 billion US dollars. And if that layoff didn't happen, you know, he wouldn't have co-founded WhatsApp.
That's inspiring story.
Exactly, right? So there's a lot of, like you say, positive outcomes. So individuals really can, for many individuals, in fact, this can be a turning point that leads to new opportunities and successful ventures. And talking about this, one of the quote that I always love is from this movie that says that yesterday was a history, tomorrow is a mystery, and today is a gift. And that's why it's called present, right? And when such situations happen to individuals, applying that to yourself is that, what can I do today to upskill and reskill myself so that I can uncover the possibilities of tomorrow.
Wow, what a powerful one. Thank you so much, Sugunah. I mean, indeed, so long as we are get ourselves prepared and be positive in facing any situation, the hope is always there.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, before we end the conversations, actually, Sugunah, from the talent and also HR perspectives, right, I always care about the people, the impact, right, on the people. Have you ever thought of the morale and productivity of people that stay and people that so-called save from this exercise? Have you ever thought of the innovation? To what extent those people that stay willing to go all out to do something differently, because the trust is always in question mark already, and to what extent they are willing to take the risk for the business. And also, have you ever thought of the potential attrition post layoff? I think these are all the things that have been in my mind, but we don't have the answer. It all depends on the experience that just now you mentioned, right? The experience, how we manage it professionally, with the element of empathy and be authentic in the carry out the conversations. Because even if things happen to the employees, if they are available and you're hiring again, I can assure you they will come back to you because of positive experience.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you. And I have got nothing to add because you have absolutely summarized it in terms of what it means for the individual and people around, right? How are they observing and what are the insights that they're taking on that will help them stay in the organization and be with the organization throughout the whole journey, right? So you have summarized it perfectly well.
Well, glad that we have a very good conversations. Of course, this is a tough topic.
It's a tough topic. It's a sensitive topic. But I'm so thankful to you and the team here for bringing it up, because a lot of people do not have the insights, whether it's organization, HR professionals, and individuals, right? So hopefully our conversation today is a balanced one that gives a lot of insight to various parties, right? But my message is always, organizations, do everything you can to avoid and minimize, and there's ways definitely to do it in the examples that we spoke about.
And I still believe that laying off people should be the last resort of any organization.
Absolutely.
From HR perspective, okay?
Absolutely.
So that's the end of the this episode and these conversations. I hope we'll continue. Definitely we're going to keep in touch. Not so much to focus on this topic, because I always believe that I want to focus on the positive side of
the conversation. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of great examples of things that HR professionals do, and happy to come and share my insights.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thanks for listening and watching this episode. Until we meet again.
Thank you, Mei Fong.
Thank you. Thanks, Sugunah.
Thank you.